Hi, everyone, and welcome back to season 2, episode 4, I think we're at, for the Read Write Mike podcast. And today we're going to continue focusing on character vocabulary, specifically within the grade bands kindergarten through second grade. And what I want to talk about today is some example, non-example games that you use when you first introduce the three of the individual words in each part. And also a game that you'll play at the end of day 2, which incorporates all three of the words in any one part. These games are called example, non-example games. The next thing I want to do is I want to go over each game and how it goes and show you what it looks like and its purpose and what it's designed to do, and how those games are different between each grade level. K1 and 2 share some of the similar example, non-example games, but they also share some different ones. So let's get started. So what is an example, non-example game? Well, this is good, frankly, for any content that you're teaching. If you're teaching anything that you want kids to know and remember, one of the first ways to check is to ask them to do a little bit of example, non-example. So you provide them with the thing you want them to know, and then you say back to me, yes or no, is this the thing that I just taught you, right? And so if you're familiar with the upper grade reading unit of study, word, law, vocabulary units, a lot of it is those games are called yay or nay, right? Yes or no, example, non-example. And there are 5 example, non-example games that you'll see across 3 grades in word, love, character, vocabulary. Let me just name those 5 right now. On day 1, when you introduce the words, 2 of the games you'll see are called Does This Make Sense? Or Who on Earth? And then on day 2, once you've taught all 3 words given for any one part, some games that you might experience are What Does It Mean? Or This or That. And another one is called Would You Rather? And interestingly enough, some of these games will often appear later on a day 5 game. And we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode. But let's take a look at each one of these games one by one. So this first game I want to share with you is something that you'll often see on a day 1 or a day 2 when you're introducing the individual character vocabulary words. In this game, it's called Does This Make Sense? You'll see this game appear in kindergarten, first and second grade character vocabulary. And let me just show you an example of it from the kindergarten unit. So you'll see that you introduce the word, right? Reliable. This is the case. You'll say how it appears in the text that you're reading, Cinderella in this case. You'll give some examples, right? And then you'll play your first example, non-example game. This one's called Does This Make Sense? Right? Let me just read it to you. You can follow along if you're watching the video version or just listen. Okay, you just introduced reliable. Now let's play Does This Make Sense? I'm going to say a sentence and ask you if it makes sense with your partner. Say yes or no and say why you think so. Does this make sense? And then you'd say to the class, a reliable kid helped clean up his room. Does this make sense? Turn and talk. And kids can talk, or they could give the gesture and their response, and you can listen in for like 30 seconds and bring them back together. And then you might do a quick debrief. You say, oh, I heard somebody say, yes, it would be reliable for a kid to clean up his room, because we know that reliable means, right, someone that can be trusted to do something. So if you can be trusted to clean up your room, you'd be reliable. And then you go to the next one and you'd say, does this make sense? A reliable parent forgot to bring snacks on a long trip. Does that make sense? And the kids will say, no, that doesn't make sense, right? And the kids explain why. You can do a quick debrief. So you see how that goes. You're just basically, after you taught the word, you're going to give them some examples. It's like, does that make sense with this example that I'm giving you now that I've shared with you this word? Okay, so now let's take a look at another game that you'll see on usually a day 1 or sometimes on a day 2 when you're introducing a word. And this one's called Who on Earth? And this one is one that you'll usually see in second grade. In K and first, we just kept the game. After you introduce a word, it's just going to be, does this make sense? And this was feedback from the pilots that they felt it was more helpful to keep it very simple for K and 1. For second grade, the second grade pilots are like, you can make it a little bit more complex for our second graders. So we did. So every once in a while, in second grade, after you introduce a word, you'll play Does This Make Sense? But you also play another game called Who on Earth. right? And so, okay, this is the example is Chicken Little. So you're introducing the word as it appears in Chicken Little, and you give the kid-friendly definition. And then you do the you do the gesture that goes along with it, and then you might give some examples. Then you play who on earth, right? And so you'd say who on earth would be an example or non-example of this word, right? So let me just read it to you. Okay, class, let's play a game called Who on Earth. I'll ask you who would be more supportive, and I want you to tell your partner and say why. Are you ready? Who on earth would be more supportive? A kid who laughs at someone who trips, or a kid who helps someone who trips? Who on earth would be more supportive? Turn and talk. And the kids would turn and talk and say, oh, it'd be the person who helps somebody, because that when you support somebody, it's like you're kind and helpful to somebody who needs it, right? So you can see the example. Let's read another one, maybe not a different one. The second one says, who on earth would be more supportive? A kid who makes a card for a sick relative, or a kid who plays video games alone all day, right? Who would be more supportive? Like, oh, the kid who makes a card because he's being kind and helpful for a sick relative, right? If you're just playing video games by yourself, you're not really necessarily being kind or helpful, right? Things like that. So you can see these are the two games that when you introduce a word that you might play. In the kindergarten or first, it'll be solely, does this make sense? But in second grade, you'll play some of does this make sense, but you'll also play who on earth. Okay, let's take a look at games that will be introduced on day 2. So after you've introduced all 3 words in any one part of the unit, because each part you introduce 3 words, new words, you play a game, and still an example, non-example game, but in the game, you're going to try playing a game with all of the words, right? And so one of them is called, what does this mean? What does it mean? And what does it mean appears in all 3 grades, K, 1, and 2. It's a very common day 2. Now that I've taught you all of the words, let's play around with all the words. And so what does it mean is pretty straightforward, right? Does this word mean this, or does it mean that? Like, which definition is accurate, or which example is accurate, right? So let me just read it to you. Here's an example from, I think, it looks like this is the kindergarten unit, because let's see some images for Cinderella. All right. Class, let's play a game using all of our words: wicked, reliable, and honest. And today we're going to play a new game. This one is called, what does it mean? I will tell you one of our words, and I'm going to give you 2 options for what it might mean. With your partner, you can say the word or use the gesture. Are you ready? Then you prompt the class, you say, does wicked mean nice or mean, right? And kids might say, oh, it means mean, or they might do the whatever gesture that you gave for wicked, right? Does reliable mean someone you can trust or not trust, right? So it's very straightforward. What does it mean? It's just, we're going to go with, and the reason it's a little bit more complex is you're working with all 3 words now, not just one. So kids kind of have to hold the meaning of the words all at once now, but it's still just example, non-example games. This is a game. What does it mean? You'll see it in K, 1, and 2. This next game I'm going to share with you, you'll see this game starting in first and also in second. It's called This or That. This or That is also another example, non-example game, and you'll see it'll give you 2 examples, it'll give you the word and then 2 examples, and which of the examples connects with the word. Here we go. Class, let's play a game called This or That using our 3 words: optimistic, cruel, and cautious. I'll ask a question about the word, and you can turn and say your answer to your partner. When would you need to be cautious? Crossing a busy street or crossing an empty street, right? And the kids would say, oh, you probably need to be more cautious when you're crossing a busy street. But you might have some clever kids that might say you should always be cautious crossing the street. But then you could say, well, which would you be more cautious? Well, sometimes these games bring really good debates into the meanings of words. So lean into that. If a kid says that, or the opportunity arises, the point isn't that they get the answer right. The point is they know what the word means. So if you have a conversation in the class where it's like, well, you should probably always be cautious when you're crossing the street, that means they're showing you know what the word means. That's beautiful. That's excellent. That's exactly what you want. All right. Next one says, what might make someone cruel? Having a nice older sibling or having a mean older sibling, right? And kids might say, oh, if somebody's mean to you, you might be mean to somebody else, whatever it is. you can see this or that, how that goes. It appears in first and in second grade. And then the last example, non-example game that I want to share with you is called Would You Rather. And Would You Rather is one of those games, and many of these games often appear in a day 5 game in a different way. So like I said, we'll talk about an upcoming episode. But in Would You Rather, you take one word and you say, would you rather this or that with the word? And the idea is it's hopefully an example or a non-example. It might be a debatable example, in which case, if it's debatable, great, then you can debate what your thoughts on it would be. But let's take a look at this one. This Would You Rather appears also in first and in second grade. Here we go. It says, let's play a game called Would You Rather. I'll ask you a question using our 3 words, and you can explain your response to your partner. You ready? Let's do it. Would you rather have a miserable rainy day or a miserable birthday? Why? Right? And since miserable is bad, this might be where kids, the debate would be like, I don't want either. Miserable is not a good thing. Or some other kids say, well, if you're going to give me the option, would I rather have rainy days sometimes can be miserable, but I wouldn't want a miserable birthday, right? And so again, there doesn't have to be a right answer, but it can bring up an interesting conversation. You're like, no, I don't want either. And that's okay. In some of these games, if the kids say, I can't decide or I don't want either, say why. In your explanation why, you're showing what the word means, which is just perfect. Okay, here's another one. Would you rather have a considerate puppy or a considerate friend? Again, this one might be a dilemma. Like, well, I love all considerate things, but if I had, but you could say if you had to choose, right? Would you rather have somebody who thinks of you as a puppy that thinks of you, or a friend who thinks of you? Who knows? Maybe it's the friend, right? Let's take a look at that one. Would you rather have an arrogant character in a book, or an arrogant sibling? Now, this one's maybe a little more obvious, right? Probably want an arrogant character in the book because an arrogant sibling is very real. In an arrogant character, you can close the book. But you get the idea. In the Would You Rather, the kids are choosing one side, and it might be debatable. They might say both. They might say neither. It's all good as long as they can explain why and show what the word means. So, colleagues, friends, we talked about example and non-example games, and we talked about how they appear when you introduce a word, right? With does this make sense and who on earth? And then we talked about what example, non-example games you might play once you've taught all 3 words in a part. What does it mean? This or that? And would you rather? I hope this is helpful as you're wrapping your mind around the K2 Word Love vocabulary curriculum. Be sure to subscribe for more goodies, and I will see you later.